address the question of a recovery program adequate to lead the United States out of the current world economic depression and at the same time provide both a powerful locomotive and a persuasive example for similar measures of economic reform and recovery across the world. Let us assume that we're working with a nice round $1 trillion US dollars. The main goal should be to create high technology, high in energy intensity, and high capital intensity jobs across the board. In order to clear the decks, however, we must first begin with the phase of rebuilding and repairing the collapsing infrastructure of the United States, in particular the interstate highway system, which, when it was begun under President Eisenhower, was the biggest road program since the Romans, is now in disrepair. Bridges are falling down, highways are reduced to a deplorable state. The precondition for the other points of the program must be to restore the interstate highway system and indeed to expand it to some extent in order to permit the rest of what we need to talk about. Our water systems are now more than 100 years old in many cases. The water and sewage systems of major cities, more than a century old, falling into disrepair, crumbling. Just in the suburbs of Washington, 2 important water main breaks in the last 6 months that deprived hundreds of thousands of people of water and indeed threatened the lives of motorists and others. We must now begin a comprehensive national program to restore water systems and to restore water projects, including irrigation projects along the American rivers and the dikes and levees of the Mississippi, Missouri, and other major waterways. Irrigation systems must be maintained in order to move American agriculture in a more intensive direction. We currently have a deficit of 1,000 hospitals which have been closed in the past 3 to 4 decades. Most of these in rural America, in the high plains of the Midwest and the Great Basin, but also in the impoverished inner cities of the large metropolitan areas. 1,000 hospitals must now be restored in order to make sure that people who have heart attacks will not be hours and hours away from medical attention that can save their lives. At the same time, we must attempt to provide an increase in the productivity of labor. We know how to do this. It should be a spectacular and visible indication that the man-hour productivity in the American economy is going to be radically improved. I propose the following. In the 25 largest urban areas, let us build for the first time or rebuild comprehensive, modern, attractive, high-speed urban mass transit systems, relying where possible on the ultra-modern magnetic levitation railway system, but also including light rail, subways, fast rail, and other variations according to the needs of the specific situation. These 25 largest urban areas will therefore cut hours and hours of wasted time from the commutes and from the traffic jams of many, many American citizens. At the same time, for rural America, let us begin a transcontinental railroad based on magnetic levitation, making it possible to go from New York to San Francisco in 3 to 4 hours in complete comfort and in total safety. In the Northeast Corridor, in Southern California, in the Chicago area, in the suburbs of Atlanta and Houston and Boulder and Denver, Colorado, we will also be able to use maglev for commuter rail, making the commute, once again, much more livable. The goal of these measures is to make life easier and more attractive, but also to increase the productivity of labor. Productivity of labor in the United States historically increased by something approaching 3% in the 1950s and 1960s. By the 1970s, because of the decline of the space program and the oil shocks, which were artificial and orchestrated and generated in their nature, the rise in the productivity of labor had fallen to only 2% a year. Our best estimate is that that productivity rate is now negative. So we've got to turn that around immediately. Notice that I say nothing of green. I say nothing of renewable. What is known as green energy or renewable energy represents a net loss for the economy. The more green and renewable energy facilities you build, the poorer you get. The farther and farther your economy will sink into depression. I call your attention to the example of Mussolini's Italy in the 1930s, trying to use ethanol to avoid League of Nations sanctions on oil. Green is a net loss because the amount of energy that has to be put into the production of energy is greater than the energy that will ever come out of these green or renewable facilities. Think of ethanol, where the creation of a gallon of ethanol requires more energy, including in the area of petroleum, than will ever be gotten out of the ethanol, and so on down the road. The technology of the windmill is hundreds, if not thousands of years old. It is obsolete. The solar cell has not become economical at this point. We know what works. 100 nuclear reactors will work. And this is the heart of the energy grid renewal of the economic recovery program. 100 fourth-generation, high-temperature, pebble-bed reactors of the safest and most modern type will be begun under this program. I will use the executive powers of the presidency to prevent the rich elitists and Malthusian fanatics of the Wilderness Society, the Friends of the Earth, the Sierra Club, the Canoe Federation, Earth First, and Greenpeace from preventing the essential energy infrastructure for the recovery being provided to the American people. Now, where might this $1 trillion come from? It could be done as part of the federal budget, but I suggest that it be done in a different way. Acting with my powers under the Defense Production Act and the Trading with the Enemy Act, as well as the inherent and implied powers of the presidency, I announced the seizure and nationalization of the Federal Reserve System in Washington, D.C., and every one of the Federal Reserve branches, starting with the one in New York City. Their membership in the Bank for International Settlements, a sinister international cabal, is hereby terminated. This situation of the Federal Reserve has gone on for almost 100 years in a totally illegal and unconstitutional form. Most eloquently, it has been a failure. The Federal Reserve has failed to prevent the crash of 1929, indeed contributed to the crash of 1929. It failed to prevent the banking panic of 1932 to 1933, and now the Federal Reserve has struck out for the third time. And as I play the game, 3 strikes and you're out. The Federal Reserve is now a bureau of the United States Treasury. I've directed the 1st Infantry Division of Fort McNair, Virginia, to use one of its battalions to place a cordon around the Mariner Eccles and related buildings of the Federal Reserve here in Washington, D.C., to prevent functionaries from coming in or out, to prevent any tampering with computers. This Federal Reserve System will now be subjected to a comprehensive audit, something that has never happened in the past. And I demand that Alan Greenspan, Ben Bernanke, Paul Adolph Volcker, and all other former members of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors and the heads of the branch offices, starting with the New York and Chicago bureaus, hold themselves in abeyance, that their passports be delivered to the United States attorneys, because the Attorney General is now going to investigate them and their acts of malfeasance and nonfeasance during their times as head of the Federal Reserve or as responsible executives thereof.